Hey guys, welcome back to The Oldest Magic. So it's been a while since I made one of these videos, and I'm really excited to do another one as we're kind of approaching Christmas. So in this particular video, I kind of want to discuss the notion of comfort versus education in storytelling. As you know, The Oldest Magic and The Midnight Suns, my blog in general, is kind of a place where I can discuss and play around with, the ideas of dreaming, storytelling, human creativity, and art. And so I'm a huge lover of storytelling in general, right? I'm a writer, and I love, paintings and poetry and movies and TV shows, etc. I'm fascinated by how we tell stories and how the telling of our stories kind of changes over time and changes sort of culturally and within various contexts. So yeah, I don't think there has to be this kind of antagonism between, education versus comfort in our storytelling and the stories that we love. I think we go to stories for different things depending on what moods we're in and the context of what else is going on in our lives, right? And I think sometimes we think of it in that kind of diametric, that kind of opposition, you know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, these are the movies and the books and the TV shows and the stories that I go to for comfort. When I want my soul to be warmed, when I want to feel, that kind of heartwarming, soothing, like, oh, everything's going to be okay. And we all have movies and TV shows and books and stories like that, right? And then there's others where we kind of want to have our minds expanded a little bit, or we want to be pushed in some way. We want to kind of be in a more thoughtful, inquiring, curious frame of mind. And we kind of think of that dichotomy, don't we, often in terms of our storytelling. But I don't think that always has to be the case. And I would argue that, you can often find both. It's just a matter of perspective and how deeply we're willing to look into the stories that we love. And I kind of want to sort of elaborate on that in this video. So seeing as we're approaching Christmas, right, I want to kind of like discuss three Christmas themed movies and kind of go into this sort of notion of comfort and education a little bit deeper. And I hope you enjoy this kind of exploration. So the first movie that I want to talk about is a movie that I love called The Holiday. You probably know this movie if you're a fan of Christmas movies at all, or just rom-coms in general. And so it's a movie that stars Cameron Diaz, Kate Winslet, Jude Law, and Jack Black. And basically the story is about two women, Cameron Diaz's character, Amanda, who is a kind of like trailer editor living out in Hollywood. And then you've got Kate Winslet's character, Iris, who is a journalist living in London and kind of Surrey. And basically they swap lives and they swap homes briefly for the holidays. And hijinks and friendships and romances ensue. It's a lovely movie, right? And it's incredibly funny and kind of heartwarming. And I think The Holiday is such a good rom-com, and it's such a good Christmas movie because it hits familiar tropes. It kind of evokes tropes and atmospheres that we all love. It's like, without going into the story, first of all, the movie looks beautiful, like the set design. Iris's cottage, the way that set is designed is gorgeous. It's incredibly cozy and sort of luxurious and homey without feeling overstuffed or overcrowded or claustrophobic. And so the set designers and the producers kind of, you could see they gave a lot of detail to that design, right? And similarly, Amanda's home in Hollywood is kind of this huge, palatial, very clean, very white, bright space. And what's interesting in the movie is Amanda and Iris are both seeking comfort that's in opposition to their normal kind of modes of discourse and their normal kind of lives, right? So Amanda is out in this kind of like high energy, high stakes world of Hollywood and screenwriters and trailers and stuff and actresses and actors, and she wants to escape. She's seeking a comfort that is more homey and more sort of down to earth and more intimate, And so she flees her home and she finds that in Iris's life. And, conversely, Iris is kind of seeking expansion and kind of liberation, and room to breathe. And she finds that in Amanda's more kind of palatial home and sort of context. So, the whole story is kind of about these two women kind of swapping lives briefly and finding, the comfort in the missing pieces of themselves by living in the kind of mirror of the other person. But, with regards to kind of what I'm trying to say here about there doesn't need to be this kind of like diametric between comfort and education, or pleasure and wisdom. Similarly, these women are both educated on the nature of love, in a very sort of gentle, sweet, but kind of mind-expanding way, in the sense that, so, Amanda meets Graham, who is Iris's brother. She ends up sleeping with him quite quickly, and then, they kind of catch feelings after, and we learn more about Graham's life and, his struggles as a single father, and, and we get to meet his daughters, and it's all incredibly sweet, and he's incredibly dashing and charming, and etc. And then we meet, Iris meets Miles, who's like a musician. Their relationship, their kind of romance evolves a little bit more slowly, but Iris's story is kind of like split. She has a kind of like dual love affair, if you know what I mean, in the sense that her romantic interest is Miles, and we see that story develop, but we also see this kind of beautiful friendship between Iris and Arthur, who is this kind of like older gentleman who is like a former producer, I believe, or it used to be a big shot anyway in Hollywood. And their friendship and their kind of like non-sexual romance, if you like, is incredibly sweet and respectful and sort of funny and amusing, etc. Your mileage may vary in this movie, and when I was younger, I often thought that like Jack Black was like severely miscast. You had like Jude Law, who's this like dashing, extremely good-looking publisher, right, or literary agent. I can't quite remember. Either way, he's the apple of many women's eye, and Amanda gets to kind of hook up with him. Kate Winslet's character Iris ends up with Miles, who is this kind of like slightly schlubby, kind of down on his luck, slightly defeated musician played by Jack Black. And I often thought, I was like, oh, like I wish the character had been played, like I don't mind the fact that the character was played by Jack Black, but I just wish that the character had a little bit more spark to him. But I guess that was kind of part of the story, in the sense that the spark and the magic, in a way, for me, was kind of provided by Arthur's character. Sort of this man kind of reawakens Iris's sensibilities and her, like, joie de vivre, her lust for life. And then she's able to kind of move towards Miles and kind of see Miles for who he really is, because of Arthur's sort of help in kind of like reawakening her senses and her soul. And similarly, she does the same thing for him. She gets him to sort of like reconnect with his creative, artistic life and to sort of take comfort in that again. And so I think that's beautiful, right? And so it's this kind of thing of like comfort versus education. Like Amanda and Kate are both seeking this kind of comfort, and they find that comfort, but they also receive an education in a very soft, kind of gentle way. They end up as wiser than they were, and so I think that's a good sort of roundabout way of explaining this idea that, like the stories that we kind of move towards for comfort, they don't have to be in opposition to wisdom, or education. It's like, you don't have to see the stories you love as just like candy, high sugar candy with empty calories, like there can be nourishment in even the most popular of stories or popular fictions. You just have to have eyes to see. You just have to be willing to look and analyze and study. It's very beautiful and clever the way the storytellers kind of mirror Iris and Amanda, And obviously Iris means I, right? So Kate Winslet is, she really wants to see She really wants to see, and she's given that sight. She's given that ability to see. She's given that ability to see Miles and, for who he is, and see herself and all the strengths that she possesses, and that she doesn't have to keep accepting a kind of like half-life, And Arthur, again, symbolically a king of sorts, helps her to understand this. And so, yeah, The Holiday is just a movie that's really sweet. It's really fun to watch. It's got great dialogue. It's got some great little set pieces like peppered throughout. And the script is just very charming and very fun. It's heartwarming. So the next movie I want to kind of talk about, a Christmas-themed movie, is the movie Last Christmas. Last Christmas stars Emilia Clarke of Game of Thrones fame, the mother of dragons, I believe, as Katarina Andrich, or Kate to her friends. She doesn't really fully embrace her name, Katarina, until the end of the story. And so, yeah, Emilia Clarke plays Kate, or Katarina, and then you've got Henry Golding playing Tom Webster. And I love this movie, and I'm not sure how it did critically or commercially, but so it's basically about Kate is working in Covent Garden in a store, a Christmas store that's like open year round. She's often dressing up as an elf, and she's kind of jaded, and she's sort of like disenfranchised and disinterested in her own life. And she's kind of a shitty friend, to be honest. She's an awful friend, if we're honest. And she has the capacity for greatness, and she has a good spirit and a good soul, but she's kind of like fallen into self-indulgence and to, a kind of sort of vague cynicism and kind of like low-lying depression that is kind of like holding her back from fulfilling her potential. And then she meets Tom Webster, and, this kind of Christmas-themed romance ensues. And through her relationship and her kind of burgeoning love story with Tom, she's able to reclaim these kind of like lost parts of herself. She becomes a better friend. She becomes a nicer person in general. She starts helping out at a local homeless charity, and she kind of really digs deep within herself to try and understand why she's such an asshole sometimes, even though she's a good person. And it's a beautiful story, and it's all kind of sort of like constellated around the music of George Michael, hence the title Last Christmas. And it also stars the wonderful Emma Thompson as Petra, Kate's mother, and she is very, very funny. I don't want to give too much away, like the spoilers or whatever, but there's like a huge conceptual conceit regarding the storyline that the whole movie is kind of framed around. And, if you study George Michael's song, Last Christmas, if you study the lyrics of that, you will kind of understand the movie on a deeper level. But again, it's a story that is a comfort, right? It's sweetness, and it's sugary, and it's very heartwarming, but there's also great wisdom and depth in that movie if you choose to see it, about, not taking advantage of your friends without quite realizing that you're doing it, when like your friends care about you, but you put pressure on them to help you continuously without really helping yourself. And they do that because they love you, but you kind of use that as a get out clause to sort of like not do any inner work. I mean, that's a really profound idea, right? That's something that we've all done from time to time. And when we catch ourselves doing things like that, I would imagine that most of us are like, oh, I really wish I hadn't done that. I really wish I hadn't behaved in that thoughtless way and, made my problems my friends' problems without them getting anything out of it. You know what I mean? Like just thoughtlessly relying on them and making their lives a little bit more difficult because they care about me, And when you catch yourself being that unconscious or that jaded, it can be kind of a wake-up call, right? And this doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means that you've kind of fallen into habitual habits and you don't quite see the larger context or the bigger picture or the ways that your sort of behavior patterns can affect the people around you, especially those that you care about the most. And this is kind of made emblematic in her relationship with her friends, Kate's relationship with her friends and especially her sister, and how she tries to, once being revivified and re-energized by her budding romance with Tom, she is then able to kind of like address these questions in her life a little bit more deeply. And she's able to accept this education, right? This wisdom, because she's also receiving this comfort. And so I think that's an interesting thing to think about, is that like, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, right? As Mary Poppins said. And wise woman, that Mary. It's amazing that she can fly. I think she might be a witch or an angel, but that's beside the point. Back to the Christmas stories. So yeah, it's a movie that I love, and I recommend that you check it out if you haven't seen it. But last but not least, movie that I want to talk about is Home Alone. We all love Home Alone, surely. I mean, you'd have to be a very cruel, heartless soul if you don't like the story of Kevin McAllister taking on the Wet Bandits at Christmas time and also learning the meaning of family, right? It's a beautiful story. It's got a lot of fun, slapstick, physical comedy in it. It's a movie that my girlfriend loves. She loves physical comedy, And every year we watch Home Alone. Every Christmas time we watch Home Alone, and I look over and I see her laughing her head off, and it's a beautiful sight to see. And but again, it's this balance between comfort and wisdom, Like the movie is obviously a confection, it's a beautifully made sweet treat, from the set design to the costuming. The house, the McAllister's house, is a mansion, and it's beautiful, and it's decorated in really elegant Christmas colors. It's like a permanent Christmas house, but it's also, a normal, like, upper middle class home, in Chicago. But the set designers have made it look and made it feel Christmassy without being too Christmassy. So it will evoke this feeling, this kind of seasonally appropriate feeling as we watch the movie. And so there's a lot of like detail that went into crafting that. So, Kevin is, he's kind of an asshole at the beginning of the story, right? He's kind of a spoilt brat. He's precocious, he's intelligent, and he's not really mean-spirited per se. He's just a little bit bratty, and he feels kind of misunderstood. But what I think is interesting is that, so when he gets involved in this story with, Harry and Marv, the Wet Bandits, and he's left home alone when his parents are like, flying out of Chicago, he goes on this journey, right? He goes on this journey of self-discovery. He's watching a movie called Angels with Dirty Faces, right? And, or if you prefer, I think it's like Angels. Yeah, I think it's Angels with Dirty Faces, but I tend to see it as like dirty meaning concealed. Angels with hidden faces. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So yeah, I think it's interesting. So the movie's set at Christmas, right? And Kevin is a child. And when Harry is casing the McAllister's home, dressed as a cop, he's impersonating a police officer. And Kevin notices him. And what does he notice? He notices Harry's gold tooth, right? And it glints, it flashes like a star in the sky. And Kevin is kind of taken aback by this. And I find that interesting because that tooth flashing like a star in that opening scene at Christmas time, for me, calls to mind a very, very famous star that kind of is connected to the Nativity, which is, of course, the Star of Bethlehem. And that's the star that the Magi, the wise men, followed. And it's a very, very famous Christmas symbol that kind of reoccurs in art and all throughout Christianity and all throughout, Christmas-themed stories. So I think it's interesting that, this golden tooth in this bad guy flashes like a star. And I choose to see this, again, like I said, comfort versus education, right? I don't see a separation, comfort versus wisdom. I choose to see that scene as an angel with a hidden face kind of giving Kevin a little glimpse behind the curtain and saying like, hey, kiddo, pay attention. Pay attention, because this star, this metaphorical star that you just saw flash, is going to be important. And it could end up saving your life. And so obviously, as the story progresses, right, Kevin is home alone, and he's adjusting, and he's learning to kind of like function alone. And, you know, the wet bandits are sort of like drawing nearer and trying to case the joint. And, you know, the dark forces are closing in around Kevin. And then we get to the scene where they're kind of stalking Kevin, you know, as Kevin's trying to get home. And what does he do? He runs to the church and he hides amongst the nativity scene. And I remember when I watched this movie years ago, like first when I was a kid, probably not much older than Kevin himself in the movie, I can't quite remember. And I remember noticing that scene even back then and being like, oh, that's interesting. That's cool, like symbolically. But I don't think I fully understood it until a bit later. But anyway, he hides as a shepherd, right, amongst the nativity scene. And so the bad guys, the bandits, don't notice him. He becomes invisible. He conceals his face. And not only does he conceal his face, he literally impersonates a shepherd, or rather than impersonating a shepherd, he literally becomes a shepherd, because he finds this cloak, you know, that this shawl that he uses as a kind of hooded robe, and a shepherd's crook. But what fascinates me is that, like, in this movie, where did he get that shawl and that shepherd's crook? Because the nativity scene that's outside the church that Kevin joins to hide is all made of like plaster of Paris, right? When the camera does a close-up pan across the entire scene, you can see that all these groups of figures are frozen in place. Their clothes are not fabric; they're sort of painted plaster. So, where did Kevin get the shepherd's crook, and the hooded shawl from? I personally like to believe that, an angel with a dirty face, meaning symbolically a hidden face, a concealed angel of some kind, left Kevin those items to help him hide from the bad guys, right? And seeing as we're talking about the nativity, I would like to imagine that, the Archangel Gabriel himself, having taken a hand in the Annunciation, the literal birth of Christ, decided to kind of lend a helping hand to Kevin. And it's funny because just a little bit earlier in that scene, Kevin realizes that these two guys, these burglars, that one of those guys is actually, the cop from the beginning of the movie. He sees Harry's tooth flash. He witnesses this flashing star again and recognizes the situation he's in, and that he's in dire circumstances and he needs to exit stage left, right? And he does. Again, I think a higher power is communicating with Kevin in some way. Well, that's what I choose to believe, right? Because it's fun. It's Christmas themed. It's Christmas appropriate. So why not? But yeah, so I find it interesting, right? Because it's in the Bible, in Luke, the shepherds are considered to be the first witnesses of the birth of Jesus Christ, right? And the shepherds in those nativity scenes, artistically depicted, often represent, the common man, humble, common people. The Magi represent, the elect, the royals, those with power. But Kevin, whilst he comes from a rich family, an upper middle class family, he is still a normal kid. He's just a normal person. And he, by witnessing this star, he kind of ends up being somewhere between a magi and a shepherd, right? He doesn't have magical powers, but he does have a great deal of skill. He has a great deal of dexterity in creating traps and diversions, etc. He has an imagination, let's put it that way. And so I find that kind of interesting and sort of quite beautiful. And this theme reoccurs later, because towards the end of the movie, when Kevin is missing his family and he's kind of like in his darkest, moment. He's in his dark night of the soul, and he wanders into the church, and old man Marley is there, right? The guy that the local kids think is some kind of serial killer, and he's really just this like sweet old man who's kind of jaded because he's disconnected from his son, and he can't see his son or his granddaughter, and his pride is sort of like stopping him from reconnecting with the people he loves. It's interesting that Marley says to Kevin, like, "Oh, well, you're always welcome in a church," and Kevin kind of like takes this to heart. And he asks him, like, why don't you reconnect with your family, as they're sitting in this church and they're listening to the service. And Marley tells him, "Oh, I'm afraid to reconnect." And so Kevin says to Marley, like, "No offense, but aren't you too old to be afraid?" And old man Marley's like, "You're never too old to be afraid." And which I think is, again, a very sort of wise insight. So Kevin, as he wanders into this church, he receives an education, right? Ostensibly kind of through Marley, but kind of guided by a higher power, symbolized by the fact that he is literally sitting in a church, a church that kind of like gave him grace and shelter earlier from the bad guys when he kind of assumed the role of shepherd. And so Kevin really does, in this scene, fully embody this role of shepherd, because, much like, in the story of Christ is able to, the birth of Christ is able to give hope and wonder and magic, bestow hope and wonder and magic and a sense of purpose to the common man, to royalty, the Magi, and, a humble shepherd. So too, Kevin is able to kind of like reawaken something in old man Marley, this person that everyone thinks is this dark, fallen person, when in fact he's just extremely lonely and kind of disconnected and numb. And so through Kevin's kind of like little talk with Marley, he kind of, says to him, like, "Look, call your son, like, like, time is short. Like, I don't care how mad I would be, like I'd want to speak to my dad." You know what I mean? And obviously we're talking about here relationships between fathers and sons, right? And we all know the story of Christ and the relationship of the Father and the Son, and, the sacrifice of the Son to ensure the larger project or mystery of the Father. The Father and the Son are one. They're different aspects of the same thing, and they're kind of united in a way that is kind of like beyond human understanding in some way. And I think this is kind of like symbolized and kind of made dramatic and emblematic in this scene with Kevin, where he becomes the shepherd of old man Marley's eventual salvation, right? And what does Jesus mean, Yeshua, Jesus, it means salvation. And so I think that's beautiful, right? And so what's interesting is that after that scene, he leaves the church, and then, the bells start ringing and he realizes the time, and Carol of the Bells starts playing on the soundtrack. And I get goosebumps every time I watch that scene, and I'm getting chills just thinking about it now, because I guess I'm a nerd and, I'm a sucker for a beautiful story, especially a beautiful story that's about hope and grace and magic and wonder and, love. And so Kevin runs home, whilst Carol of the Bells is playing, and he's like, "This is my home. I have to defend it." And he lays out his plan, his battle plan, and he starts setting his traps and preparing for the arrival of the bandits. And what's interesting is that there's even, like towards the end of the movie, there's even a sort of symbolic leap of faith that Kevin has to take, where he has to like make it from the window of the house to the tree house on the kind of like zip line, And I see that as kind of a symbolic leap of faith. He he literally ascends and he kind of flies like an angel. And he again, there's a lot of symbolism in the movie if you choose to see it in the right context. The water, the wet bandits, the fact that the house is flooded towards the very end of the movie. The neighbor's house, I believe, and then when all seems lost, Kevin is then saved by Marley, the man who he kind of shepherded in an earlier scene in that church, and kind of reawoken his his sensibilities and his connection to God and to his family, etc. And so, Marley saves him, and he's able to escape the bandits, and then the cops come, and justice is served, and peace is restored. And Kevin has to get his house in order and clean up everything before his parents get back. Or he hopes, so he's wishing on a star, like a Christmas miracle. And it's funny because Kevin manages to clean up the entire house, God knows how, literally. And but he leaves that tooth lying on the floor, and I don't think that's an accident. Obviously, symbolically and from a storytelling or a screenwriting point of view, it's very funny. But within the in-universe story of Kevin, I like to think that kind of Gabriel was like, no, you just leave that there. You didn't notice that particular thing. That's for your father. That's for the father. And literally, when the parents come home, the father picks up that gold tooth and it kind of flashes, or I think it flashes perhaps before he picks it up. Either way, you see that kind of star motif, that kind of shining star motif again in the hands of the father. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful kind of story, right? If you choose to see, the education and the wisdom and the insight and the layers, you can say, right, this is a comfort movie. This is a story meant to warm my heart, and it's meant to be an easy watch, and it's meant to be amusing and humorous and uplifting. But there's also a real story here about friendship, about family, self-discovery from Kevin's point of view, but even deeper themes, themes that don't shy away from religion and grace, and literally the true spirit of Christmas is kind of explored in a very deft and elegant way in a movie like Home Alone. The Annunciation, witnessing the birth of Christ, the Good Shepherd. And I could go on and on and on and on. And so it's a movie that's very beautiful. And I hope you enjoyed hearing me discuss it with you. And so I just wanted to have a brief video, exploring this idea that there doesn't have to be this dichotomy between comfort and education, pleasure doesn't have to be separate from wisdom. You can have both. It's just a matter of perspective. It's just a matter of what you choose to see and how deeply into it you choose to see. In conclusion, if you haven't seen, The Holiday or Last Christmas or Home Alone, go watch it now. Go watch them now. It's imperative that you do so, or over the next, week. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate. If you don't celebrate Christmas, I hope you have a beautiful holiday nonetheless, with people that you love. And just know that I'll be sending you my love. And you'll be getting a lot of well wishes from me, from the man upstairs, and hopefully from Santa Claus himself as well. And because I think they're all working together, right, to kind of deliver the spirit of the season to us. And if we can look with bright enough eyes, we can see that, Nicholas knows what's going on. Christ himself knows what's going on. The Father definitely knows what's going on. And if we're ever in doubt, hopefully a star will guide us, So look up. And I'll speak to you soon, guys, and Merry Christmas. Peace.